parts, and I'm hoping to do this in a way that's going to work out well for everybody. In fact, it's going to be the path of least resistance. Guys, today we're going to be moving at a good clip because I want to finish Chapter 7. We finish Chapter 7, we're out the door today. So instead of doing a review today, we're going to do a review the first day we get back. That gives a chance for our team here to be ready to see if they're going to stay in the game or our team over here gets the bonus points. Reminder, tonight your Chapter 6 recruiting exercises due at midnight, the KPT guitars exercise. We'll cover that again in a minute. On the 2nd, you have a Chapter 8-9 online quiz. Guys, it's simple. Watch the videos, read the PowerPoints, take the simple online test. I believe I even put a bonus question in there. Get a perfect score on that. It counts as a full test grade. It'll bump up your test grade. On the 3rd, those of you who are going with me to the Center for Community Action, that will be our last trip. I'll have materials for you today to review. We'll cover those on Monday when we get back. On the 4th, Wednesday we get back, we're going to be doing our test on chapters 4, 5, 6, and 7. Yes, you will have a review sheet. Yes, it's everything we covered in class. It's a normal test. And because of that, the only classes we have left, we've got Monday and Friday the week we get back. Whatever we cover in those 2 classes is what will be on the final exam. Yes?
Last week I asked about the Chapter 6 recruiting exercise, and you said it wasn't going to be due until the 27th.
You know, I did say that. Yep. Okay, we can make it due. It'll be due on Wednesday. I think that's what it says on Canvas anyway, right?
It said on Monday, but then on the PowerPoint you said the 27th, so I asked about it, and you said, my mistake, but we'll have it due on Monday.
You know what? You just got an extension. You got till Wednesday to get it done. I'm sorry I didn't remember that. Honestly, guys. So that recruiting exercise is due this Wednesday. I'd encourage you to get it done tonight so you don't have to think about it over break, though.
The one that's on campus is due tonight is actually Wednesday.
Yeah, so because I made a mistake on the slide, you guys will benefit from my mistake. Honestly, between Friday and today, it just hasn't been that much time. So I apologize for that, guys. And the other thing, too, if you have not recorded your service hours, please do so. You're going to have one additional writing exercise in this class the week we get back, and it's an easy one. I'm going to be asking you to reflect on your experiences. You're going to be getting 10 easy points for telling me what it was like to work at the Center for Community Action. Very easy. I'm not going to grade you on your grammar. I'm not going to grade you on your punctuation. I'm going to grade you on whether or not you submit a reflection. So are there questions about what we need to get done between here and the end of the semester, guys? It's a lot, but it's manageable. Guys, just a reminder on the assignment, I'm asking you to do a recruiting assignment for KPT guitars. Tell me if you're going to recruit internally or externally or both. Tell me what your concerns are in the recruiting process. Keep it simple. Keep it direct. Apply what we talked about in class. If you have specific questions, I will answer them later, but it's due on Wednesday, not today. All right, guys. We're going to be moving at a good clip today, so I'll be asking you to ask me questions if you need me to stop and go over something. Guys, what's superior in some ways about having a list of questions for all of your interviewees as opposed to being improvisation? If we have one scenario where our interviews, we have the questions written down that we want to ask versus one where we just make them up on the spot. Yes? Exactly right. So we have high inter-rater reliability because if we're asking everybody the same questions, we have something equal to judge people on. Is there a disadvantage to structured interviews? If we only are allowed to ask the questions that are written down, is there a disadvantage? Okay, what's the disadvantage?
You kind of put the person in the box. You don't get the full person.
I completely agree. So a good combination is the idea of having structured and unstructured questions. So an unstructured interview means you just literally walk into a room and somebody will ask you stream of consciousness questions. That can be very difficult to compare people. It might be good at higher level interviews if you're interviewing somebody for a management position and they are like a top level candidate. Maybe that works. Semi-structured interviews means we kind of got a compromise between the two. We've got some questions that may be listed, but we may also improvise off of those questions. If you get a group interview, that means you've got a panel of people you might be interviewing with. Has anybody ever been on a group interview? Well, it's stressful, isn't it?
Yeah.
And tell me why. Why is it stressful?
Well, this is when I was like applying for the job at Foot Locker, and it was just like, you just everybody, all the eyes on you, and like everybody, it's just a lot going on.
When I walk into a panel interview, I feel like I'm walking into the parole board or something. Like everybody's waiting to see if I'm going to screw up. They can be very intimidating. It's good to let people know, for example, if you're doing a panel interview, You also can do a group interview where you're interviewing several people at the same time. Do I have any RAs in here? No RAs? They often at St. Francis will make the RAs do group interviews to see how they interact with each other. So you can do that kind of group interview as well. And you can also do what we refer to as a non-directed interview, which means once somebody gives you an answer to a question, you ask the next question based on what their answer was to the previous question. Oh, did you go to college? Well, yes, I did. Okay, well, what was your degree in? That would be a non-directive interview, for example. Now, we have lots of ways we can conduct interviews. It can be one-on-one. You might go in. One time I interviewed for a job at a university where I literally went from one room to the next and interviewed repeatedly with other people. It's very fatiguing. It can wear out somebody, for example. You can do sequential, you can do a panel, you can even do a team. You might have lots of people interviewing you. If you're interviewing for a head coach position, for example, who might you want to include in those interviews? The people who are actually going to be working with that person, for example. We're moving quickly simply because we've covered a lot of this stuff informally, guys. Some things I would also tell you, too, in terms of having effective interviews, the more you do them, whether you're the person being interviewed or you're conducting the interview, the more you do it, the better you get at it. It's always good to be able to plan it. In other words, we have a plan. When somebody comes through the door, we're going to greet them. We know that we might ask a couple easy questions up front. Why might you ask somebody a couple of simple questions at the beginning of the interview? Yes? Put them at ease. Absolutely. So you get somebody comfortable. When we say controlling the interview, it means you might want to have a designated time. If we've got 17 people we're interviewing today, yeah, we might want to maintain 30-minute slots so that we've got control of it. In terms of the questioning techniques, we're going to talk about what good questions are and how we can also avoid putting a slap judgment on somebody. Why are open-ended questions sometimes better than closed-ended questions, by the way? Oh, what happened there? Not sure what happened there. That was interesting. All right. We join our presentation already in process. Guys, why is it better sometimes to ask open-ended questions as opposed to yes-no questions? Yes?
You get to know the person better than just on the next question.
Exactly right. I'm going to do an explanation right now. Avery, do you like pizza? Conversation. Jared, what kind of food do you like? Yeah, like, tell me a little bit more about some of the things you like to eat. Even at that, I had 3 times the conversation because I didn't ask a yes-no question. I think it's also a great idea to avoid those questions that nobody really is going to be truthful to. Guys, what is the classic question that nobody's honest about? What are your weaknesses? How will you answer that question? I care too much. I overwork. I overcommit. I don't charge my bosses enough. I work too cheap. Those are questions people are not going to give good answers to. Leading questions. Can somebody tell me what a leading question is? I'll give you an example. Here's a non-leading question. Ian, what are your thoughts about fast food?
I like it, even though the quality might not be as good as
Zach, what are your opinions about unhealthy, greasy, artery-clogging fast food?
Yeah, you probably shouldn't consume it.
So one was a leading question, one was open-ended. I love greasy fast food. It's one of my biggest problems in my life. But when you ask people this kind of question, you don't want them to be leading. Again, you don't want to ask questions that are either illegal or inappropriate. I mean, for example, what are some questions under those circumstances should you ask someone? Yes? Absolutely. And we'll go back to that why it's a bad idea too. Yes? Absolutely. Unless it plays into something with the job, even then, that's a tough one. You shouldn't be asking people about. What else should you not ask them about? Yes? For sure. Unless it's relevant to the position, you should not ask that question. Religion, unless it's relevant to the position. If somebody's a pastor, if they're applying for a pastor, yes, you might get a pastor to ask somebody's religious beliefs. But generally speaking, no. Here's another reason. Well, you should never ask somebody if they're pregnant. Because even if you're not doing a job interview, you might find out that they're not. I've been in that movie before. I ran into a friend of mine I hadn't seen since high school and asked her when she was due, and she wasn't. That was awkward for everyone involved. So if you don't know for sure, don't ask. Let them talk to you first. So anyway, in terms of other things that you don't want to do during an interview, it's so hard not to do. When we're listening to somebody, we nod. We just do it. I hear what you're saying. We can't help but we do it. If you're interviewing somebody, what could that nod be giving that person? What impression might it be giving them? Yeah, I'm nailing this interview right now. This guy's been nodding at me the whole time. It's very hard not to do. And things like mirroring or echoing, if we are repeating too much of what they say as though we agree with them, we can come across and give people false hope in these interviews. Things that are very common, again, these are easier to read out of your text because of the small print here. We know the kinds of things that people are likely to ask us in terms of the general question. Tell us your strengths and weaknesses. Why should we hire you? If you can't answer that question, you're not prepared for the interview. In terms of problem-solving questions, you might ask somebody about a time when they had to solve a complex problem or a time when they failed, what they learned from it. In terms of motivation, for example, what motivates you? What plays into your perfect job? If you had to think about the things that make you happy. Questions about working with others. We'd ask somebody their management style or how they do in a team environment. And in terms of integrity, we might ask them questions about honesty. Here's a great question about honesty. If you were walking through this room and found a $20 bill on the floor, what would you do? I'm not asking you to tell me what you would do. I think I would probably be tempted to keep it, but would I take it down to the lost and found? That's an example of a question that measures our integrity. Some of the other things that are really bad that we do is making snap judgments on somebody. Has anybody here ever had the wrong impression about somebody based on their first impression? Yeah, we do it all the time. There are some people who are some of my best friends. The first time I met them, I didn't think we were going to be friends. So it's the same deal with snap judgment. Somebody gives you one wrong answer to a question. That doesn't mean you should totally shut them down. Negative emphasis. Ian, what's negative emphasis? Yeah, you won't find the answer on the internet for this one. You will find it in this classroom. The negative emphasis means you're only listening to the things that people are talking about that are negative. Similarly, the halo effect. If somebody gives you one good answer to a question, and that's all you listen to from there on out, that basically you think that they're a great person, you've also allowed yourself to be biased. Bias and stereotyping too. For example, one of the most common areas we see that these days are older individuals. When you walk into a room and you're over the age of 50, people immediately assume you don't know how to use technology. That would be a bias or stereotype. And cultural noise means that maybe, for example, in your environment, if you've got such a male-centric environment that you can't even fairly evaluate a female candidate, you got too much cultural noise in your organization, and it's not a good or healthy culture. Guys, at this point in time, should you assume your employer is going to run a background check on you? Yes, you should. Because they're cheap, they are easy, and they tell us just about anything we want to know about somebody's past criminal history. I know this stuff because it happens. I also know this from working with some of the folks we're working with over at FCI Loretto. These can be very problematic for some people. A similar and related concept is called negligent hiring. And that means when you know somebody is not right for the job, you hire them anyway, or you got somebody who's in a sensitive position and you choose not to do a background check on them. That's negligent hiring. Negligent retention means when you find out somebody that you hired probably isn't good to work in your environment. They didn't pass their child clearances. They did not pass their safety clearances or the background check. If you keep them employed and you know, the liability can come personally on you. In terms of some of the background investigations and things we should also think about, guys, if somebody wants to do a background investigation on you, you have to give consent for them to do it, just like a credit check. By the way, guys, can somebody tell me a profession in which you might want to do a credit check before you hire somebody? Why might you want to do a credit check? For sure, somebody working with money. The U.S. government does it for people who are working in any kind of classified information. Because somebody's got bad stuff on their resume, somebody who is financially irresponsible could also be taken advantage of in terms of bribes as well. So, in terms of the Fair Credit Reporting Act, in that regard, means if somebody's running a credit check on you, you have to give permission, you have to be notified. By the way, do you guys know how many places there are in the United States? How many major credit reporting bureaus there are? Total of 3. So they got a lock on this business. And when somebody does this to you, you have to get a copy of the report as well. So anytime you're doing background checks, if somebody is working with money or people, you should be able to know what their past history has been. Have they gone bankrupt, for example? Background checks are telling if somebody has a felony, if they've had issues that would keep them from working with children, because we are in the post-Jerry Sandusky era, and even if somebody had problems with drugs, for example. Now, in terms of medical examinations, I know we're moving quickly here today, guys. Generally speaking, if you want to do a pre-employment physical on somebody, it better be tied to the job. If it's the state police, that makes perfect sense. Somebody working in an office doesn't need to be able to adhere to the same paramilitary standards that the state police have. The Americans with Disabilities Act means you cannot do pre-employment medical exams with the exception of a drug test, and a drug test is based on a conditional offer of employment. It means if somebody's applying for a job, you cannot deny them from being eligible just because they're disabled. If you're asking for physical information, it had better be related to the job. And in terms of drug testing, guys, here's the general rule. Let's say, for example, I work for a trucking company, and I have an accident. The truck is involved in an accident. It may not even be my fault. What's the first thing my employer is going to make me do? It's going to make me go for a drug test. They want to see if there's alcohol in my system. They want to see if there's controlled substances. That is standard practice in a lot of companies. Generally speaking, though, companies, if they get a positive, will require a second test because you get false positives from all kinds of things. Anybody know where you can get a false positive on a drug test? Poppy seeds. Have you ever eaten poppy seed rolls? Poppy is the root ingredient to heroin. So literally, if you ate a poppy seed roll every day of the month, you can get a false positive on your drug screen because it's got trace amounts of opium. So that literally can happen. If you go to a rock concert, for example, and people around you are smoking the ganja, is it going to show up on your hair on a hair test? It could. And so it's one of those things that if somebody would show up for a positive on a hair screen, they're going to give you a blood screen as well to make sure you're not actively using it. It's the new reality we work in, guys. If you live in a state where marijuana is legal, by the way, can your employer still drug test you? Yep, they can. So we got to figure this out. I know I went off on a rant about this, guys, but the feds have to give us some guidance. This is not fair to be putting this stuff back on the states. Before I continue, because we're moving at a good clip, can I have a question or comment from anybody? What would you like to know? Sir?
Favorite Thanksgiving food?
Without a doubt, pumpkin pie. My Aunt Nancy's homemade pumpkin pie. How about you?
Do you know what corn pudding is?
I do. Wow, that's cool. So somebody in your family make it?
I had it before and didn't like it. But my aunt, for some reason, makes it. Wow, it's like bacon in it. It's awesome.
Bacon and corn. Man, sign me up. What else, you guys? What are your favorite Thanksgiving foods, guys? I know we talked a little bit about this morning. What are you guys excited to eat over Thanksgiving? Mashed potatoes. And gravy? Lots of gravy. What else are you guys excited about eating? Mac and cheese. Do any of you eat the cranberry sauce that comes out of a can? Oh, I love it. That's like so nostalgic. I don't know what it really is, but there's just something good about it. So we're going to keep moving, though, guys. Guys, the reason we check references. Actually, let me ask you. If I checked a reference on you guys, what could I learn about you? What could I learn about you if I talked to somebody who you worked for? I could learn about your working ethic. What else might I learn about? Habits. Was this person on time? Did they do quality work? I can tell your character. I could learn all kinds of things about you. And it's one of these things, guys, it's not something that's happened yet. But there is a movement to be able to say that we're going to hold people's references accountable too. What's the danger, for example, if I worked for one of you guys, let's say, Carter, I work for you, man, and I was a terrible employee. And I go someplace else, I'm trying to get a job someplace else, and they call you as one of my references. Are you honest or not? Tell me why. Well, if I was a shitty employee, I was just a bad employee, I was lazy, I wasn't any good, you had to yell at me 10 times a day to get me to do what I was supposed to do. And somebody's asking you, what's Tonkin's work ethic like? What are you going to say? Tell them the truth. Why? Honesty is the right answer. Why is it the right answer? Other than integrity. Why else is it a good answer? Yes?
Show like the business standard of putting up with that.
For sure. But Carter also might be applying for a job in my company someday. And if I get this crappy employee because Carter gave me a reference on somebody that was an outright lie, I can remember that. When you give somebody your stamp of approval, you're giving them your integrity as well. So when you're giving somebody a reference, you're on point as well. Here's what I encourage you guys to do. If somebody ever asks you for a reference who you would not honestly be able to recommend, be honest with them and say, I can't in good conscience be your reference. It's one of the toughest things you will ever say to somebody. I've had to do it like twice in my entire life, but to tell somebody I will not be a reference for you because the person was not a good worker. You have to do that because it comes back on you. How long somebody stayed on the job can be something people would look at as well, but it's becoming less important these days. Why is that, guys? Exactly. You guys are going to possibly 12 to 14 careers in your lifetime, or at least jobs. So that's not a good measure. In fact, some companies, if you have stayed with a company too long, they look at you and say, why didn't you go somewhere else? The world is changing. We're also looking, though, if you've got a large gap in your employment, let's say, for example, there are some things that are easy to say. I took time off in the workforce to have a family. It's tougher to say I was incarcerated. So have good answers for any gaps in your employment. You may be honestly saying, if somebody asks you about a gap in your employment, if you're comfortable saying it, you might mention that you had a serious medical condition, hoping that they will not unintentionally have bias against you. Those are tough questions to answer. And we also look at people's education credentials too. So sometimes when the things have gone well and you're getting ready to make the job offer, if you're making the offer over the telephone, you should also send a formal offer in writing. Can a verbal contract still be considered a contract under court of law? It can, but it's hard to verify. Here's the 3 rules of business. If you remember one thing from this class, 3 rules of business. Write it down, write it down, write it down. You put it in an email and you document it. The email has got a time and date. It can serve in some circumstances as a contract. At the very least, it is documentation and it's stored somewhere beside your computer if you're using something like Gmail. Before you make an offer, your lawyers in your company have probably already made sure that you are staying in the clear with the kinds of things you're offered, and your terms and conditions of employment should also be outlined. In other words, is this a contract position? Am I going to have an annually renewable contract? Am I up for evaluation? Once that person says yes, don't believe it till you got it in writing. And after they sign it and they return it to the employer. After you get that in writing, whether it's an email or whether it is in paper, it should go on file. You should have a copy of it somewhere in your system to make sure you know exactly what that person has said. Some of the other things that can be really tough, guys, if you apply for a job, who here has ever applied for a job and not heard anything back? Yeah, why is that so frustrating, guys?
At least know what you want, what was, why you wanted it.
I completely agree. I think when possible, we owe it to our applicants to say, this is why we didn't hire you. This is what you could have done better. Or at least to tell you that the job search is over. So we do a terrible job with that. It's okay also to send people out an email or something in writing and say, we hired somebody else. Thanks for applying. That might salvage some of that positive relationship with the company. I think, too, anytime you're hiring employees, the more that you're hiring for the job and based on the qualifications and the more that you're going in a blind process to begin with, the better chance you're doing something non-discriminatory and fair. And that being said, guys, with 20 minutes to spare, we finished the chapter. I'm going to wish you all a very happy Thanksgiving. I will see you when we get back.